The streets were crowded, noisy, and full of life. But for the 8-year-old girl, each day felt heavy and exhausting. She moved through the alleys carrying a small bag with the little belongings she had, always alert to the people passing by. Life had not been kind to her. Her parents were gone, and she lived with her younger brother, trying to make ends meet however she could. Most days were about finding food and avoiding trouble. The sounds of the city were harsh, vendors shouting, cars honking, dogs barking. But every now and then, there was a melody in the air, soft and sweet, almost invisible among the chaos. One day, while wandering near a quiet part of the street she didn't often visit, she saw it. A piano, old and weathered, sitting under a broken shelter. The keys were yellowed, some missing, and the wood was chipped in places, but it called to her in a way nothing else had before. She approached it slowly, afraid that someone might chase her away. No one seemed to notice her. She lifted the dust-covered lid, and the smell of old wood and time reached her nose. She pressed one key with a tentative finger, and a soft, uneven sound came out. Her eyes widened. It wasn't perfect, but it was music, and it was hers in that moment. The girl sat on the cold bench, her small fingers exploring the keys. At first, it was just random notes, clumsy and uncertain. She had never touched a piano before, and yet, there was something inside her that recognized the sounds. She hummed along, trying to match the notes with what she imagined. Hours passed without her noticing. The world outside went on, but for her, time stopped. Every note made her heart race. She felt alive in a way she had never felt before. People started noticing her. Some stopped and laughed. "You? Play this piano? That's a joke," one man said, shaking his head. Children pointed and snickered, whispering to each other. A few older women clucked their tongues, muttering that she was wasting her time. She felt their eyes on her, heavy and judgmental. For a moment, she wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But the piano stayed there, calling her back. She pressed another key, and then another, letting the sounds fill the empty street. She didn't have lessons, sheet music, or guidance. Her only teacher was the piano itself and her own determination. Some nights, when the street was empty, she imagined herself playing for a crowd, her music filling the air, making people stop and listen. Those dreams kept her going, even when the laughter of strangers tried to pull her down. Every day, she returned to the piano, sometimes for only a few minutes, sometimes for hours. Each time she played, she learned something new. She learned which keys sounded bright, which keys felt heavy, and which notes made her feel like she was speaking without words. Food was often scarce, and her stomach growled more than it should have. But she didn't care as much when she played. The piano became a place of comfort, a secret world where she could escape the harshness of her life. She imagined herself as a great musician, someone people would admire and respect. It was hard to believe in that life when the world outside seemed so cruel, but the piano gave her hope. Neighbors began to take notice. Some were kind, offering small smiles or a nod of encouragement. Others were cruel, laughing louder when she hit a wrong note. A boy who sold newspapers once threw one at her, saying she was wasting her time. She picked it up silently, her face burning, and continued to play. Each insult, each laugh, only made her more determined. She wanted to prove that she could create something beautiful, even if no one believed in her. Her younger brother often watched from a distance. He didn't understand the music, but he understood that it made her happy. Sometimes he would bring her a piece of bread or some fruit when she stayed at the piano for too long. He didn't ask questions, didn't criticize. He just sat quietly and waited, like a small shadow that followed her wherever she went. Their bond was strong, built on survival and quiet love. The piano became part of their shared life, a strange, magical presence amid the struggle. One rainy afternoon, she played while the drops fell on the pavement. The sound of the rain mingled with her notes, creating a rhythm she had never imagined. People ran past, umbrellas in hand, but a few lingered, drawn by the strange music. They didn't know who she was, didn't care about the dirt on her clothes or the thinness of her frame. For a moment, The music spoke louder than the world outside. She felt a surge of pride and wonder. Maybe, just maybe, she was meant to do this. Her hands were small and unsteady, but they moved with a curiosity and bravery that no one could teach. She experimented with chords, hitting keys randomly, listening to how they blended together. She created patterns, little songs that made her smile. Each mistake was a lesson, each success a small triumph. People continued to watch, some with amusement, others with surprise. She didn't need their approval, but the reaction made her realize that her music had power, could make people feel something, even if they didn't understand it. Nights were the hardest. She often went to sleep with an empty stomach, worrying about the next day. But in her dreams, the piano was there, glowing under a soft light. She played in grand halls, on stages, in front of crowds who cheered. She imagined herself grown up, playing with skill and grace, turning heads and changing minds. That vision was a lifeline. It was a reminder that her circumstances didn't define her, that she had something inside her that could not be taken away. One evening, an older man who seemed to understand music stopped to listen. He didn't laugh. He didn't point or mock. He simply watched, silent, letting the notes flow. When she finished, he clapped softly and nodded. For the first time, someone had acknowledged her, not just her attempt, but her potential. She felt a warmth in her chest, a validation she had never known. That small gesture became a turning point, planting a seed of confidence that began to grow. She started to notice details she had never cared about before. The way certain keys felt under her fingers, how pressure changed the sound, how pauses could make the music breathe. She practiced more deliberately, experimenting with rhythm and tempo. Every day, she challenged herself, pushing past mistakes, learning to listen, to feel, and to imagine. The piano became not just a toy or a curiosity, but a companion, a mentor, and a source of identity. The neighborhood slowly began to change how it saw her. Some people stopped laughing, curious instead. Children who had mocked her started to peek from corners, whispering questions about how she could make such sounds. A few adults, skeptical at first, began to watch quietly, perhaps realizing that there was something remarkable happening before their eyes. It was subtle, but the shift in perception gave her courage. She realized that persistence and passion could slowly turn ridicule into respect. Despite her youth and the hardships surrounding her, she felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was creating. Each day at the piano was a step toward something bigger, something unknown but beautiful. The laughter of the streets could not silence her, and the scarcity of her life could not diminish the music she carried inside. She was growing stronger, not just in skill, but in spirit, learning that the smallest hands could produce the grandest sounds when guided by heart. The piano and the girl became inseparable. It was a story of resilience, of hope, and of quiet triumphs that no one else fully understood. In that moment, on those dusty keys under the open sky, she was not just a street girl. She was a musician, an artist, and a dreamer. And though the world might laugh, she knew that one day, the music would speak louder than any doubt, louder than any insult, louder than anything that tried to hold her back. The next morning, the girl returned to the piano with the same excitement and nervous energy that had carried her through the previous day. The streets were just waking up, and the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery mixed with the scent of rain-soaked earth. She stepped carefully over puddles, her small shoes worn and cracked, and approached the piano. The sun's rays hit the keys, casting shadows that danced with her movements. She pressed a few keys, testing the sound, and felt the familiar warmth of possibility flow through her fingers. As she played, a group of children gathered, drawn by the clumsy but earnest notes. At first, they watched quietly, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. Then, a boy laughed loudly, pointing at her hands. "You? Play this? That's impossible," he shouted. Others joined in, their laughter echoing through the alley. She felt a sting in her chest but did not stop. She pressed the keys harder, letting the notes fill the air, trying to drown out their jeers. The laughter continued, but there was a small ripple of silence when a higher, sweeter note rang clearly. It was a small victory, almost invisible, but it gave her strength. Passers-by started to notice, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "Why is she even here?" An older man muttered. A woman clucked her tongue and walked away. She ignored them, focusing only on the sound under her fingers. Every note was a statement, a quiet rebellion against the world that had told her she was nothing. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, and the music began to sound like something more than random notes. It was imperfect, raw, and alive. Her younger brother watched from a distance, his eyes wide. He didn't fully understand the music, but he understood the courage it took for her to keep playing. Sometimes, he brought her little gifts. A piece of bread wrapped in cloth, a small coin found under a bench. She accepted them quietly, thankful, and pressed the keys with renewed determination. He could not help her play, but his presence was a silent support, reminding her that she was not completely alone. By the afternoon, a small crowd had gathered, including adults who rarely paid attention to street performers. Some were curious, others skeptical. They whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling faintly at her persistence. One man, a street musician, approached and listened quietly. When she finished a small piece she had practiced, he clapped softly. His approval was gentle but meaningful, like a light cutting through the grayness of her day. She felt a warmth in her chest, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, her music could matter. The street continued to be a place of both ridicule and encouragement. Some people laughed at her, calling her foolish and poor. They threw coins at her feet, some in mockery, others in curiosity, as if testing whether she could turn the coins into music. She picked up the coins silently, not letting the actions of others affect her focus. Each insult, each laugh, each skeptical glance became part of her training. She learned to play through noise, to find beauty even amid chaos, and to trust in her own abilities. Rain came in the late afternoon, soaking the streets and making the piano keys slick. She considered leaving, but something inside urged her to stay. She pressed the keys gently, letting the water enhance the sound, creating a rhythm that was uniquely hers. People slowed their steps, some stopping to watch, mesmerized by the unexpected harmony between rain and music. A few children, who had once mocked her, clapped softly when a note landed perfectly. The smallest gestures of recognition became monumental victories in her eyes. Her days began to follow a pattern. Morning was for practice, afternoon for dealing with ridicule, and evening for imagining a future where her music could be heard beyond the streets. She began to notice patterns in her own playing, small techniques she had invented by trial and error. She could make certain notes sing, others sigh, and still others hum with a deep resonance that surprised even her. Every mistake taught her something new. Every success, no matter how small, became a building block for her growing confidence. One afternoon, a man with a kind face approached and stood silently at a distance, watching her fingers move. He didn't laugh, didn't question, didn't interrupt. When she paused to rest, he simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that she had something special. She felt a spark of pride and gratitude. In a world where most people overlooked her, he had noticed. That simple act gave her courage to try more complex melodies, to experiment with timing and rhythm, and to imagine music not just as a collection of notes, but as a story she could tell. Evenings were the hardest, when hunger gnawed at her stomach and the city felt particularly cold. She often went to bed with nothing but the memory of music in her mind. But in those moments, she realized something powerful. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a teacher, a friend, a source of strength. It had given her something that the streets, poverty, and ridicule could not take away: hope. She learned that her own determination was louder than the laughter of others, that her music could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Sometimes the girl imagined what it would be like to perform in a real hall, with a real audience, lights, and applause. The vision was almost unbearable in its beauty, and yet it felt possible, because the piano had taught her to dream in ways she had never allowed herself before. Each note she played was a step closer to that dream. She didn't know when it would happen, or if it ever would, but she knew she had to keep playing, keep believing, and keep fighting against the world that told her she couldn't. Her resilience began to inspire others, even if they didn't realize it. A young boy who had once mocked her brought a small stool and sat quietly nearby, listening without interrupting. An older woman stopped by each day, offering a piece of bread or a smile. People who had doubted her began to notice the patterns in her playing, the growing confidence in her hands, and the undeniable spark of talent. It was subtle, but slowly, she began to feel that maybe the world could see her not as a poor street girl, but as someone with extraordinary potential. Even amidst laughter and skepticism, she found joy in the smallest details, the feel of a key under her fingertip, the vibration of a note through her bones, the way a melody could rise and fall like breathing. She discovered that mistakes were not failures, but steps toward mastery. She learned patience, persistence, and the quiet power of self-belief. The piano was no longer just an object. It had become a mirror of her spirit, reflecting her resilience, courage, and creativity. The days continued, each one blending into the next, full of struggle and small victories. Her brother remained a constant presence, sharing what little they had and cheering her on in ways he could. Strangers continued to mock and judge, but their voices grew quieter compared to the music that filled the air. She realized that the laughter of the world could not define her. Her music, her persistence, and her dreams were louder, stronger, and enduring. By the end of the week, the girl noticed that the street where she played was slowly changing. Children who once laughed now watched with curiosity. Adults who had ignored her began to pause and listen. The piano had become a focal point, a small island of beauty in the middle of a rough and challenging world. She felt a swell of pride, not because the world had changed completely, but because she had found her own strength within it. She had turned ridicule into motivation, doubt into determination, and a simple street corner into a place where music could live. Her heart was full of determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. The piano would always be there, waiting for her, guiding her, and allowing her to express the depth of her spirit. Even at 8 years old, she understood that her life could be more than survival. She could create, inspire, and dream. And each day she played, she took another step toward a world that might one day see her not as a street girl, but as a musician capable of touching hearts and changing minds. Days turned into weeks, and the girl continued her routine with the piano, her small hands dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. Each day, she discovered something new. A chord that felt like laughter, a melody that reminded her of the sky at dawn, a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the city. The streets were still harsh and people still stared, some with amusement, some with doubt, but slowly, a few began to listen differently. The notes she played began to carry not just sound, but emotion, and it became harder for even the skeptics to ignore. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the street in warm gold, a man with kind eyes stopped to watch her play. He seemed to move with careful observation, listening without judgment, waiting for the girl to finish her tune before speaking. When she paused, he clapped softly, a gentle sound that seemed louder than any of the harsh laughter she had heard before. She froze for a moment, startled by the kindness, then nodded politely, unsure of what to say. He smiled and crouched down, placing a small notebook in front of her. It had blank pages, a simple gift, but it meant the world to her. He didn't tell her she was good. He simply acknowledged her effort, which mattered far more. Over the next few days, he returned, sometimes bringing a small treat, sometimes just sitting quietly and listening. He asked her questions about her music, about the sounds she liked, about the melodies she imagined. He encouraged her to explore different rhythms, to feel the music instead of just pressing the keys. The girl absorbed everything, eager to learn, grateful for someone who believed in her potential. With his guidance, she discovered new ways to connect with the piano, to make it speak her feelings more clearly. The small crowd of onlookers began to notice the change as well. Some children who had laughed before now watched silently, fascinated by the patterns she was creating. A few adults lingered, curious to see what she would do next. She played pieces that were more complex, weaving stories into her music. Even though the notes were still imperfect, they carried an unmistakable emotion that captured attention. For the first time, she realized that she could touch people's hearts, that her music had power beyond the simple act of making sound. At home, she shared her progress with her younger brother, showing him how she had learned new sequences and harmonies. He watched intently, clapping along with her small rhythms, his eyes wide with pride. She realized that the piano had not only changed her own life, but it had also brought moments of joy into the harsh realities of their daily existence. Each note became a small victory over hunger, poverty, and doubt. The man who had noticed her skill also introduced her to the idea of writing down her music. He taught her how to sketch the notes on the page, to plan the melodies she imagined before trying them on the piano. At first, it was confusing, the symbols strange and abstract. But she persisted, tracing lines with her small fingers, learning to connect the written word to the sounds she loved. It was a new form of expression, one that made her feel more complete, more in control of the music she wanted to create. She felt like she was uncovering a secret language that had always been inside her, waiting to be discovered. Her practice sessions grew longer, and her skill improved rapidly. She began to feel the music more deeply, letting it flow through her rather than thinking about each individual note. The street became a place of learning and creation rather than ridicule. Sometimes people would stop in silence, listening with genuine interest rather than mockery. She began to understand that talent alone was not enough. It required dedication, patience, and a willingness to endure discomfort and criticism. Her life on the streets had taught her resilience, and now it was shaping her music into something extraordinary. One day, a small crowd gathered, larger than usual. The man with the notebook had invited a few people who were curious about her skill. Some were music teachers, others were musicians themselves. They watched silently as she played, her small hands moving across the keys with confidence and grace. Each note carried intention, each chord a reflection of her imagination and emotion. The laughter that had once followed her seemed distant, replaced by whispers of admiration and surprise. It was a moment of quiet triumph, one that she would carry with her forever. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She knew that there was much to learn, that her journey was only beginning. Every mistake was a lesson, every applause a reminder that her path was long but achievable. The piano had taught her patience, perseverance, and the quiet power of believing in oneself. She realized that music was not just about talent or skill, but about connection. Connecting her feelings to the keys, connecting her to the people who listened, and connecting her present to a future she could imagine. Her brother continued to be her companion, often bringing small snacks or simply watching her play with quiet admiration. Their bond deepened, strengthened by shared hardships and the joy of seeing her talent recognized. The piano was no longer just an object in the street. It had become the center of their world, a symbol of hope, creativity, and resilience. It had transformed a corner of the city into a place where dreams could take shape, no matter how humble the beginnings. As the weeks passed, her reputation began to grow. People who had once doubted her stopped by to listen, some even offering encouragement or small gifts. The laughter of the past became a memory rather than a daily obstacle. She had earned the respect of her neighbors through persistence, courage, and the undeniable charm of her music. The piano, battered and worn, had become her teacher, her partner, and her voice. It spoke for her when words were not enough, expressing emotions that were too complex to describe otherwise. One evening, as the sun set and the street grew quiet, she played a melody that seemed to float into the sky. The man with the notebook sat nearby, smiling quietly. Her brother clapped softly, his eyes sparkling with pride. People passing by paused, caught in the beauty of the music, and even those who had once laughed could not help but stop for a moment to listen. The girl felt a surge of accomplishment, knowing that her perseverance had created something meaningful. She realized that recognition was not about fame or reward, but about touching hearts and sharing a part of oneself with the world. She began to imagine her future more vividly. She dreamed of performing on stages, of having people listen with full attention, of expressing her feelings through music in ways that could inspire and heal. Each practice session brought her closer to that dream, and the lessons she had learned from ridicule, hardship, and persistence became the foundation for her growth. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It required courage, patience, and unwavering dedication. The girl's life continued to revolve around the piano. Each day brought new challenges and new discoveries. She experimented with different styles, tried to improvise, and explored the emotional depth of the music. The more she played, the more she understood herself and the world around her. Her skill grew, but so did her confidence and her belief in what was possible. The piano had opened a door, and she stepped through it, ready to explore the vast world of sound and creativity waiting on the other side. By the end of the part, the girl had transformed from a timid, ridiculed street performer into a young musician with growing recognition and respect. The piano was no longer a lonely companion, but a bridge connecting her dreams, her reality, and the people who began to see her talent. She learned that persistence, belief in oneself, and the courage to continue despite adversity were more powerful than ridicule or doubt. And in the quiet moments, when her fingers danced across the keys and the world fell away, she felt the truth of her potential, knowing that this was only the beginning of her journey. The day of the local community performance arrived, and the girl felt a mixture of excitement and fear that she had never experienced before. The street where she usually practiced had become her stage, but this was different. There would be people she had never seen, faces full of judgment and curiosity, some with the power to open doors and some ready to dismiss her entirely. She woke early, her stomach empty but her heart full, and carried herself to the venue. A small hall decorated with colorful banners and filled with the hum of conversations and nervous energy. Her brother walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. He did not speak much, but his presence gave her courage. She imagined the piano waiting for her, familiar and forgiving, a friend that would guide her through the nerves and the uncertainty. Her fingers itched to play, to pour all her practice, her emotions, and her dreams into the keys. The other performers arrived, some polished and professional, some young and nervous like her. She watched them, feeling both intimidated and inspired. Her small frame and simple clothes made her feel even more vulnerable, but she reminded herself of all the hours she had spent practicing in the street, ignored and laughed at, and she knew she was ready. When her turn was called, she walked to the piano, her small hands trembling slightly as she touched the keys. The hall fell silent, and all eyes turned toward her. She remembered the laughter on the street, the doubters, the skeptics, and she felt a quiet fire ignite inside her. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys, and took a deep breath. The first note sounded, timid at first, but with every passing measure her confidence grew. She played a melody she had imagined for weeks, one that told the story of her life, the struggles, the small victories, the hope, and the dreams. The audience shifted uncomfortably at first, some unsure of what to expect from a young girl who had been laughed at on the street. But soon, the notes began to fill the room in a way that could not be ignored. They carried emotion, clarity, and a raw beauty that surprised everyone. The music spoke of longing, courage, and resilience, and people leaned forward, captivated. She did not need to see their faces. She could feel the change in the air, the attention turning from doubt to wonder. The melody rose and fell, each note a declaration of her determination and her talent. Her hands moved across the keys with a rhythm and grace that belied her age. The mistakes she had made countless times in the street seemed to vanish under the spotlight. She played with intention, letting the music flow naturally, guided by hours of practice and the fire of her imagination. She could see a few adults exchanging astonished glances, whispering to each other about how incredible it was that such a small girl could produce such sound. Even the other children performers watched in awe, their previous doubts melting away as they realized she was extraordinary. Her brother sat in the audience, eyes wide, clapping along softly, proud and amazed. He had seen her practice, seen her grow from a timid child to someone capable of commanding attention with her music. He knew that this moment was more than just a performance. It was a triumph over the streets, over ridicule, and over doubt. He cheered quietly, careful not to distract her, but his pride radiated toward her, giving her strength. She felt the warmth of his presence and let it guide her fingers, letting the music reflect the bond they shared. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence, almost as if the hall was holding its breath. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder and louder, filling every corner of the room. The girl's heart raced, and tears welled in her eyes. She had done it. She had played not just with skill but with heart, and the audience had responded. People who had once doubted her now saw her in a new light. Her talent could not be ignored, and her perseverance had turned the laughter of the past into admiration. After the performance, several people approached her, praising her skill and asking questions about how she had learned. Some offered opportunities to learn more, to play in bigger venues, to receive training from professional musicians. She listened, overwhelmed by the attention but grateful for the recognition. For the first time, she realized that her dreams could become reality, that the music that had kept her alive on the streets could also open doors to a better life. The man who had given her the notebook earlier was there, smiling quietly, pride shining in his eyes. He had watched her growth from a timid street player to a young musician capable of moving hearts. He told her gently that she had something special, something rare, and encouraged her to continue practicing, to explore the full range of her abilities. His support was steady, unwavering, a reminder that guidance and belief could make a world of difference. She felt a deep gratitude for his presence, knowing that without his encouragement, this moment might have been much harder to reach. Her brother hugged her tightly, and for a while, they simply held each other, letting the emotions of the day sink in. The streets, the hunger, the ridicule. All of it seemed distant now, replaced by the possibilities that her talent had unlocked. She understood that life would not be easy, but she also knew that she had courage, skill, and determination to face whatever came next. The piano had taught her more than music. It had taught her resilience, patience, and the quiet power of believing in oneself. In the days following the performance, the girl continued to practice with renewed energy. The community began to talk about her, spreading stories of the street girl who could play like no other. People who had once ignored her now paused to listen when she practiced. Some children came to learn from her, inspired by her dedication. She began to see that her music had the power to inspire and bring people together, creating connections that went beyond words. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge between her world and the world of others, a way to communicate what she could not always express in speech. She experimented with new melodies, improvising and creating songs that reflected her experiences and dreams. Each day brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. She discovered the depth of her creativity, the nuances of emotion she could express, and the satisfaction of transforming her thoughts and feelings into music. Her hands moved with confidence and grace, her ears attuned to the subtleties of sound, and her heart open to the possibilities of the world around her. The girl realized that this turning point was only the beginning. There would be more performances, more challenges, and more moments of doubt. But she now had proof that her dedication and talent could overcome fear and skepticism. She had learned that courage and persistence could transform a simple act into something remarkable, and that her music had the power to change perceptions and touch hearts. As the weeks passed, her life began to shift subtly. People in her neighborhood treated her with more respect. Opportunities for lessons and mentorship appeared. She continued to perform on the street, not because she needed recognition, but because the piano had become an extension of herself, a way to express the depth of her experiences. She felt a growing sense of purpose, understanding that her music was more than entertainment. It was a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her dreams. Through it all, she remained humble and grounded. She remembered the days when people laughed at her, when she had played alone under the open sky, and the hunger and hardships that shaped her early life. Those experiences were not forgotten. They had built the foundation of her resilience and determination. She played with gratitude, with hope, and with the knowledge that every note she struck carried a piece of her story. Her journey was far from over, but the turning point of that community performance had shown her what was possible. She understood now that music could change not only her life but also the lives of those who listened. It was a reminder that talent, when combined with courage, determination, and support, could break barriers, defy expectations, and create opportunities that once seemed impossible. The girl continued to play, each day bringing new growth, new discoveries, and new dreams. Her music became a language through which she could communicate her feelings, inspire others, and imagine a future beyond the streets. And as her fingers danced across the keys, she knew that she was on the path to something extraordinary, a journey that had begun with curiosity, nurtured by perseverance, and now blossoming into recognition, hope, and endless possibility. After the community performance, the girl's life began to change in ways she had only dreamed of. People in her neighborhood recognized her not just as a street girl, but as a talented young musician with a rare gift. The same streets where she had been laughed at became a place where people stopped to listen, offering encouragement instead of ridicule. Some neighbors brought small gifts, sheets of music, pencils, or snacks, simple gestures that made her heart swell. It was a quiet recognition, a reminder that her persistence had begun to matter, and that her talent could inspire others. Word of her skills spread beyond the streets, reaching local musicians and teachers who wanted to help her grow. One afternoon, a kind woman who ran a music school visited her while she practiced. She introduced herself gently, praising the girl's dedication and natural ability. She explained that she could help her learn properly, teach her theory, and guide her in refining her technique. The girl felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never imagined leaving the streets to study music, but the thought of learning more and improving made her heart race with anticipation. Her brother squeezed her hand, silently encouraging her to take this step. Under the guidance of the teacher, the girl began formal lessons. It was a new world for her, full of terms she didn't know and techniques she had never practiced. At first, it was difficult. Reading sheet music, practicing scales, and correcting habits she had learned from trial and error on the streets tested her patience. But she approached each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through years of ridicule and struggle. Slowly, she improved, discovering nuances in sound, rhythm, and expression that she had only imagined before. Each lesson added depth to her understanding, transforming her raw talent into something more polished and controlled. Her practice became more disciplined. She spent hours at the piano each day, experimenting with melodies, harmonies, and dynamics. She began composing small pieces of her own, expressing her emotions and experiences through music. Some pieces were joyful, celebrating small victories. Others were somber, reflecting the hardships she had endured. Her music became a diary of her life, a way to process and share her story without words. As she played, she noticed that people listened differently now, not out of curiosity or amusement, but with genuine attention and respect. The girl also performed at small local events, gradually building confidence in front of larger audiences. Each performance was a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but she drew strength from the piano, her teacher's guidance, and the memory of her early days on the street. She remembered the laughter, the jeers, and the doubts, and she realized that those moments had shaped her, making her resilient and determined. The applause and admiration she now received were the rewards of years of persistence and belief in herself. Her relationship with her brother remained strong. He continued to support her quietly, celebrating her successes and comforting her in moments of doubt. Their bond had been forged in hardship, but it grew stronger with each passing day. He often watched her practice, clapping along or simply sitting nearby, sharing the joy and pride of seeing her talent recognized. The piano had brought them both a sense of hope and purpose that had been missing for so long. The girl also learned the importance of giving back. She began teaching younger children in her neighborhood, showing them simple melodies and encouraging them to explore music. She understood the power of opportunity and recognition, and she wanted others to experience the same joy and growth. Watching the children learn and smile as they discovered music reminded her of her own journey and reinforced her belief in persistence, patience, and the transformative power of encouragement. One day, a local radio station contacted her teacher, inviting the girl to perform live. The idea of playing on the radio was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never imagined her music reaching people she could not see, across the city and beyond. But she practiced diligently, preparing a piece that reflected her journey, her struggles, her victories, and her dreams. When the day came, she performed with confidence, letting the music speak for her. The response was overwhelming, with listeners calling in to praise her talent and express their admiration. The girl realized that her music could reach far beyond her neighborhood, touching hearts and inspiring others in ways she had never imagined. Despite growing recognition, she remained humble and focused. She knew that there was still much to learn, and that her journey was ongoing. She continued to practice, explore, and experiment, always pushing herself to improve and to express herself more fully through her music. Each day was a balance of discipline and creativity, a mixture of structure and imagination, allowing her to grow as both a musician and a person. Her teacher encouraged her to participate in larger competitions and events, offering opportunities to perform on bigger stages and in front of professional musicians. The girl felt nervous, recalling the days when she had been laughed at on the street, but she also felt prepared. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to continue despite it. With each performance, she grew more confident, more expressive, and more capable of connecting with her audience. Through these experiences, she discovered a sense of purpose. Music was no longer just a refuge from hardship. It had become a way to inspire, to connect, and to express the depth of human emotion. She understood that her talent was a gift, one that carried responsibility and opportunity. She began to imagine a future where she could teach, perform, and share her music with people around the world, knowing that her journey had begun with curiosity, perseverance, and the courage to believe in herself. The girl also reflected on the people who had supported her along the way, the teacher who had guided her, the man who had first noticed her talent, her brother who had always been by her side, and the neighbors who had encouraged her in small ways. She realized that success was never a solitary achievement. It was built on the kindness, guidance, and support of others. These lessons of gratitude and community became as important to her as the music itself. As she continued to grow, her story became a symbol of hope for many. People began to speak of the street girl who had been laughed at but had turned ridicule into determination, transforming hardship into artistry. She inspired others to pursue their passions, to believe in themselves, and to recognize that talent, when nurtured with perseverance and support, could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. Her journey was a testament to resilience, courage, and the transformative power of following one's dreams. Eventually, the girl's opportunities expanded beyond the local community. She received invitations to perform at regional events, meet professional musicians, and explore avenues for formal training. Each new experience was both a challenge and a chance to grow. She approached them with the same humility, determination, and curiosity that had defined her earliest days on the street. She understood that her journey was ongoing, that there would always be more to learn, and that each step forward was a continuation of the path she had forged through persistence and belief in herself. Despite her success, she never forgot her beginnings. The streets, the ridicule, the struggles, all of it remained a part of her story. She visited the corner where she had first discovered the piano, sometimes playing quietly for those who stopped to listen. She wanted to honor the journey, to remember the challenges that had shaped her, and to give back to the community that had been part of her early life. These moments of reflection reinforced her humility and deepened her appreciation for the opportunities she had earned through hard work and resilience. Her music continued to evolve, growing richer and more expressive with each passing year. She explored new styles, experimented with composition, and developed her own unique voice. Audiences responded with admiration and emotion, recognizing the depth and authenticity of her performances. She became not just a talented young musician, but a symbol of perseverance, creativity, and hope. A living example that talent, when nurtured and pursued with courage, could change lives and inspire countless others. In the end, the girl realized that her journey had taught her far more than music. It had taught her about resilience, empathy, gratitude, and the power of believing in oneself. It had shown her that opportunities often arise from persistence, that encouragement can transform a life, and that even the smallest gestures of support can make a profound difference. Her life had been transformed not only by her talent but by her determination to pursue it, the guidance she received, and the belief that she could rise above hardship. As she sat at the piano, playing a melody that carried both joy and reflection, she understood that her journey was ongoing. There would always be more to learn, more stages to perform on, and more hearts to touch. But she also knew that she had already achieved something remarkable. She had turned laughter into applause, ridicule into recognition, and struggle into inspiration. And in that knowledge, she found both pride and peace, knowing that her music would continue to shape her life and the lives of those who listened for years to come.